So we've finally moved on from Genesis to Exodus, and in our Moments That Matter series, and we've missed a whole lot of great stories and passages and characters in the Bible along the way, but probably the most significant being Joseph. But seeing as I did a mini-series on that at the beginning of the year in January, you can check online and get that. But we've gone from probably one of the most disturbing, according to some people's perspective, most disturbing stories in the Bible from last week being, the binding of Isaac, potential, sacrifice of Isaac, all the way through to now one of the most loved, iconic and foundational stories of the Bible, the birth and rescue of Moses. And, it's a very popular story. It's one of the ones that is often, in kids' church and all that kind of stuff that we love telling. But some history. So, you've got a bit of the story there from the video. But, if we remember back to the story of Joseph, remember he saved his family from a great famine by welcoming them into Egypt, where he became second in command. But by the time we get to the book of Exodus, Joseph and his immediate family had died, leaving a new generation, the generation after him, who had grown into quite a people group, a lot of people. And Exodus 1 tells us that a new king came into power in Egypt who did not know Joseph. And unlike the kings prior, this king was hostile towards the Israelites because he feared they might continue to multiply and one day become a threat. So he tried to suppress them with hard labour. Nothing like getting people to work really hard and work them to the bone to see if you can weaken them physically, emotionally, and break their spirits and socially. But that didn't work. They continued to grow in number. So Pharaoh instructed the Hebrew midwives to kill the newborn Hebrew babies while sparing the girls. This is, the girls, they're allowed to live because they'll intermarry and get absorbed into society and actually contribute, where the men, they might actually go and form, get together and say, we don't like these Egyptians, and actually decide to fight against them. They'll become warriors or become an army. But once again, in reverence for God, the midwives refused to kill these babies, claiming that, I love this, Hebrew women are more vigorous than the Egyptian women to give birth, when they give birth, and they give birth before we even get a chance to arrive. Not quite true, but, frustrated and unable to control the population. And so you can just imagine Pharaoh's, he's like, what am I going to do with these people? They just keep multiplying like rabbits. What are we going to do with these people? So he orders every Hebrew boy born to be thrown into the Nile River, except for the girls. So this is the background of Moses' birth. It's in the context of a targeted genocidal decree aimed at reducing the Hebrew population and limiting their future influence. But as we will discover as we go into the reading today, none of Pharaoh's efforts, despite Pharaoh's work at trying to reduce the Israelites, they all fail because of the courage of a group of women. It's all the women's fault. So I might get myself into trouble today. But yes, his efforts were thwarted because of a group of women. So we're going to get into Exodus 2, 1 to 10. I might just stand over here so you can actually read it on the screen with me. Here we go. Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could not hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. When Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Then his sister, Moses' sister, Miriam, asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes," she said, "go, do it." So the girl went and got the baby's own mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." It's a cool story, isn't it? It's a pretty amazing story. Now, growing up, I had 3 mother figures. If you think one is hard enough, I had 3. 3 mother figures. I had my biological mum. I had my big sister, who is 16 years older than me. And so back in those days, well, everyone assumed that she was my mum. She certainly treated me like I was her son. When we'd go out to the shops, everyone would frown, because particularly back in those days, it was like, ooh, a single young girl with a baby. But yes, so I had my big sister who pretty well in a lot of ways raised me. And the elderly lady next door, because I didn't get to know any of my grandparents, she adopted me as like her grandson. And so they were all 3 women, very different to each other, different personalities, yet all had a profound influence on me, caring for me, nurturing, protecting, and teaching me in different ways. Likewise, Moses had 3 mother figures. There was his biological mother, who nurtured and taught him, his older sister, who watched over him with concern, and there was his adopted mother, Pharaoh's daughter, who brought him up in the palace. And in many ways, this story isn't so much about the birth and the rescue of Moses. Rather, it's a story about courageous women who defy the odds in order to bring about God's purposes and plans, with the ripple effects of their actions affecting the generations that follow. So firstly, courage to move beyond fear. Courage to move beyond fear. Now, anyone who's had children or got children would know how hard it is sometimes to stop your child from crying or having a dummy spit. And often it happens at the most inopportune times. You might have angel children, but you take them out into public and all of a sudden they're like, "Ah!" And everyone's watching going, "What terrible children." Or you're thinking, "Oh," they're probably thinking, "What terrible parent am I?" And they're doing this dummy spit. And no matter how hard you try, it's like you try harder, they just get worse. And it's like, why can't you be like what you are when you're home? Anyway, imagine then trying to keep a 3-month-old from crying so that it wouldn't draw attention to the Egyptian death squads, right? If they came past the house, we saw it illustrated in the video, came past the house and heard a baby cry. How were they going to stop that? It gets to a point where they couldn't any longer. Presumably they had help from their community, but as I said, there came a time when Moses' mother, Jochebed, could not hide him any longer. For to do nothing would certainly mean death for Moses. If they were found out, they would take the child, they would kill him, but they would possibly be punished as well. The mother and the whole family. So, certain death for their family. Yet, despite having to make this heart-wrenching decision to give up her son, I actually reckon she knew deep down that God was going to do something amazing to protect him. In verse 2 it says, and his mother is called Jochebed. We know this from other parts in the Bible. She said she saw that her child was fine. Fine. It's an interesting term to refer to your child. Hey, what's your child like? Oh, he's fine. Yeah, he's fine. Not very enthusiastic, is it? Other translations say that he was beautiful, which is a very different translation, isn't it? Now, I understand that most parents consider their newborn babies to be the most beautiful baby they've ever had or ever seen. I said most parents. I actually reckon ours came out looking like shriveled up prunes. There was nothing pretty about our children at all. But they've made up for it. Look at, they've made up for it. The original Hebrew word translated for fine or beautiful is actually the same word used by God to describe creation. So at creation, he said, it was good. It was good. It's exactly the same word that's actually used, the Hebrew word. So it was good. In other words, it had order and it had purpose. Purpose. You know, Hebrews 11:2-23 and Acts 7:20 describes Moses as being no ordinary child when he was born. And I think Moses' mother sensed that. In fact, I think she knew that he was destined for a special purpose, even as a baby. So with that belief at heart, Jochebed moved to act with courage to not only save her child, but to ensure he went on to fulfill that purpose, whatever that might be. You know, like the midwives who defied Pharaoh's orders to kill the baby boys when they were born, Jochebed too was not willing to be ruled by fear. You know, she was going to go outside, go beyond in order to make sure that her son survived, despite the dangers, despite the consequences that might come her way. You know, courage to move beyond fear was also seen by Moses' sister, Miriam, who was bold enough, get this, she was about the age of 7 to 9. She's little tacker. She was bold enough to seek an audience with Pharaoh's daughter. And even Pharaoh's daughter displayed courage by defying her father's orders by not drowning the child, as expected. You know, the expected response for Pharaoh's daughter would have been to go, respect her father, do what her father said, get the baby and drown it. Sounds horrible. Well, it is horrible. What can I say? That was what the expected outcome was. But she took it one step further. Not only did she not kill the child, she adopted the child. You know, that's a pretty amazing idea. You know, I'm not sure how she got away with that. I'm not sure how she managed to be so... She must have been very persuasive to get the royal household to accept her adopted Hebrew son. Maybe it was because, you know, she was actually one of 60 girls. Pharaoh had 60 daughters. So maybe Pharaoh didn't have much to do with her and that's how she got away with it. But either way, you know, it showed great courage for her to stand up against her father. Anyway, my point in all this is that all three women, and I'm going to say women because it's actually 2 women and a young girl, but all 3 women, especially his mother, showed remarkable courage in the face of certain death if they had been discovered. You know, where in your own life might God be inviting you to act with courage to overcome fear? Now, I'm not talking about courage as in, I hate heights. I don't think I'm going to be jumping out of a plane anytime soon or do bungee jumping. Heights is just not my thing. I'm not talking about those kind of things. I'm talking about fears that prevent you or stop you from actually doing what God's called. Fears that actually stop you or hold you or restrict you from actually doing God's will. Yeah? What fears might you need to overcome? Okay. Secondly, their courage empowered them to put their faith into action. And I've talked about this a bit lately. Empowered them to put their faith into action. Now, it's all very easy. You see in the kids' videos and whatever, you know, little baby Moses in his basket having a ball of his time, having a time of his life, bobbing up and down in the water, having a bit of fun there. But I think we romanticise that a little. You know, in reality, this moment was filled with fear, great risk, and deep uncertainty. Now, the Nile was not one of those places that you would take your family to. It wasn't a place that you'd go down to go swimming or to have a picnic along the edge of the water. You know, because the Nile was this huge river. It's this huge river that goes through the desert. It was the space or the place where everyone... It was the place of life. But it meant it was the place where all the animals, you know, gathered as well. And so you had, you know, animals like crocodiles, hippopotamuses, deadly snakes such as cobras, lurking along the water's edge. Here's a fun fact for you. Do you know that more people die as a result of from hippopotamuses than lions, elephants, leopards, buffaloes and rhinos combined? How's that? It's a bit of random fact there. Crocodiles, hippopotamuses may appear to be, these friendly, helpless little animals, but they're actually quite dangerous. So my point is that the Nile was not a place that you necessarily went to unless you had to, and you'd want to make sure that you got some weapons to fight off some animals along the way. And there was no guarantee that the child would even be discovered before the current carried him away. Or worse still, the basket, toppled over and the baby drowned. But left with very few choices, this was a risk his mother was willing to take. But I want to say it was a calculated risk. A calculated risk. By mentioning that the basket was placed amongst the reeds indicates that the water was relatively shallow and the current was slow. The reeds provided protection from predators, yet also allowed the basket to be visible enough for just the right person to come along and see. It's often assumed that the basket was discovered, along the Nile outside Pharaoh's palace. But actually it's more likely that his mother placed the basket near one of Pharaoh's many private riverside residences along the River Nile. He apparently had lots of them, little hunting lodges along the edge of the Nile. And they would have been places where there wasn't a lot of people gathering around, and there wouldn't have been a large, military or, kind of presence, guards hanging around, which would have made it easier. So although through her careful planning, his mother increased the odds of her son being found, and with her daughter Miriam on guard at a distance, it became a matter of wait and see. Yet despite her careful planning, nothing that followed could ever have been anticipated. When Miriam saw her brother being rescued by none other than Pharaoh's daughter, she bravely approached and offered to find a Hebrew woman to nurse the child. Isn't it amazing, really, isn't it? You remember, as I said, she's about 7 years old, 7 to 9, and maybe her mother had perhaps instructed her to do this. We don't know, that the text doesn't say. But it's still incredibly brave of her, isn't it? Incredibly brave and ingenious to bring back her own mother to care for the child. God was doing something in her life as well. Not only was his mother reunited with her son, but she was even paid to care for him, and probably as a result received some kind of protection. So here we got a story where she has to give up the child because of really she had no choice, to only get him back and get paid for having him back and to be protected for having him back. It's crazy. Crazy. The fact that everything fell into place as it did was purely God's doing. Some planning was involved on his mother's behalf, but it was God who provided the ultimate solution. It continues to amaze me how God comes through with the solutions to some of our decisions. We might put in some planning and put in certain strategies or whatever it might be, but how things happen to fall together and work out always continues to amaze me. Having faith and putting your faith into action doesn't mean sitting back and waiting to see what God will do. Faith does not mean being passive. It's not sitting back in resignation or assuming that inaction is the same as trust. But faith is trust expressed through actions while we wait for God to do what only he can do. It moves forward when the outcome is uncertain, choosing obedience over fear even when circumstances feel overwhelming and unclear. As with Moses' mother, her faith is visible not only through her confidence in God, but in her courageous and practical steps she took to hide Moses, to prepare the basket, and to release him into the Nile. Although Moses' mother is often praised for her courage, Miriam, his big sister, although her contribution was small, played a crucial role, didn't she? Through her quick thinking and boldness, she helped to bring about an outcome far greater than anyone could have realised. Which to me just shows that no matter how small our actions for God may be, they can have a profound and lasting impact, can't they? Sometimes I hear people go, my contribution is insignificant. I remember preaching at a church, not this church, and I had some lovely older people come up afterwards. I was speaking about something similar, about putting faith into action and stepping out there, and they came up and said, "Oh, that was lovely, dear. That was lovely, dear. But we're beyond that now. We're too old. Bollocks. Biggest load of rubbish." Am I allowed to say bollocks? The biggest load of rubbish. It's not true. You're never too old. And even the tiny little, what may seem insignificant things that you do for God, God can turn into something amazing He'll use for His own purposes. So don't ever underestimate how God can use even the smallest step of faith to shape something far bigger, far greater than we could ever imagine. Finally, faith that shapes a future. Research has shown that a child's early years from birth to about the ages of 5 to 7 are the most important for brain development and growth. And it's during this time, caring and consistent relationships help shape learning, behaviour and emotional well-being, in which these early experiences have a lasting impact on a child. Think about it. As a result of his mother and Miriam's actions, his mother was able to care for Moses during these formative years. How amazing is that? So she did give him up. But it was during those years where his little brain is sucking in everything around him, every little piece of information, where he's, discovering who he really is. She got the opportunity to feed into that. She helped shape his identity and sense of belonging. During this time, she likely instilled in him her love for God and a strong awareness of his Hebrew background, his Hebrew heritage. Foundations that would remain with him throughout his life. Her influence meant that even as Moses grew up in Pharaoh's household, he did not forget his people and did not forget their suffering. This early shaping would later play a significant role in his calling to confront the oppression of his people and to lead them out from slavery. But at this point, I actually want to point out that Moses' mum, Jochebed, actually had 2 other children. One of them I've already mentioned. But all of them, grew up to be influential leaders of Israel. Miriam, his big sister, became Israel's first ever prophet and worship pastor. There you go, John. The first ever worship pastor. Or leader. Pastor, leader. Whereas her second child, Aaron, who we'll read about as we go on through Exodus, ended up serving as Moses' spokesperson and later became the first high priest and was responsible for establishing Israel's worship and sacrificial system. As a mother, Jochebed's influence helped lay the foundation for a family that would play a central role in the story of Israel's deliverance and worship. Mums, you actually play a significant role in the future of your children. But let's not forget also Pharaoh's daughter. In Acts 7:21 it says, Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up as her own son, where he was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and became powerful in speech and action. You know, Moses' adoption gave him access to a high-level education, Egyptian education, security, and a unique position that would later equip him to lead Israel out of bondage. How amazing is this? You know, like I said last week, none of this is coincidental. You know, God's plan, his hand was over Moses from the very beginning. You know, taken from his mother, brought back to his mother, given the opportunity to have those foundational years and for him to understand what it really meant to be an Israelite, to be a Hebrew. Then gets adopted back in to the Egyptian world, where he gets to learn all about this other world, because he needed to have his foot. He needed to understand his past, but he also needed to understand the Egyptian culture and what was going on there, so that he could then become the person God has actually called him to do. Sometimes in life, so I'm going to be off track, but I feel like sometimes in life it's not until we look back and we go, wow. At the time, it's like, why am I doing this, God? We complain and whinge and say, why am I stuck in this job? I'm talking about me, why am I checkout chicken at Coles? Why am I doing this? Oh, checkout rooster, sorry. Why am I, doing this? Why have I led here? But each step, and when I look back at my life now, I can go, wow, that led to this, which led to this, which led to this. I didn't realise what God was doing. Some of us are a little bit older will get that. You know, God uses all things for his good. Amen. You know, whether or not this is true or not, but I thought this was kind of interesting and really cool. But according to Jewish tradition, Pharaoh's daughter, we always call her Pharaoh's daughter, does she have a name? Well, apparently she does have a name. Bithiah, which actually means daughter of Yahweh, daughter of the living God. Her name is mentioned in 1 Chronicles 4:18. And according to Jewish literature, she was considered to be a righteous woman who converted to Judaism after saving Moses. As I said, I don't know how true that is. We can't verify, it's not in Scripture. But how cool would it have been if, as a result of her compassion and of her courage, she came to faith in the one true God? I wouldn't be surprised I would like to believe this to be true. You know, because of the influence of Moses' mother and Pharaoh's daughter, the lives of those they cared for were positioned, prepared, and shaped in ways that would ultimately serve God's purpose in delivering his people and fulfilling his promise to create a great nation. Likewise, when it comes to our children, in our lifetime, we may never see all the fruit of our labours. But God can take what we quietly sow and shape futures far beyond that which we could possibly imagine. Like the women discussed today, we can only do our best and ask God to do the rest. Is that right? Do our best and ask God to do the rest. You know, just as history remembers Moses' mum and Miriam, his sister, and Pharaoh's daughter as courageous women who defied a tyrant to help save Moses, today we honour the courageous women amongst us. Many people define courage as the absence of fear, but true courage is not found in never being afraid. Courage is a strength to face fear, to face difficulty and uncertainty, yet still choose to move forward with faith and determination. You know, this Mother's Day, we honour the courage of mums, grandmothers, aunties, carers, and in fact, any woman who cares and nurtures for children. We honour those who face uncertainty, worry, and exhaustion, yet choose to keep going in love, faith, and trust. We honour those who make hard decisions each day on behalf of their families and children, those who advocate for their children, and those who faithfully walk through every stage of parenting, or this parenting journey, with wisdom and humility. And we honour those who, through every sacrifice, every prayer, and every unseen act of love, are quietly shaping the next generation. Mums and carers, your courage is not always obvious, but it is powerful And its impact reaches far beyond what you may ever see. Now, not all of us have had necessarily great role models like the women discussed today, but we can recognise the value of women in our lives who have shaped and supported and influenced us in positive ways. You know, for those of us, or those amongst us who are, you know, for Mother's Day is actually a difficult thing, perhaps for various reasons, maybe, you know, loss, grief, painful experiences. You know, I encourage you to seek someone and pray through that. For everyone else, you know, use today to show your appreciation of your mother or your mother figure, someone in your life who has influenced you in significant ways, someone who has actually showed great courage in amongst, you know, as I said, courage isn't, we sometimes think courage is found in places like battlefields, but it's actually in our day-to-day lives, you know. Now, this is me going off track. I feel like women are unique in that my wife and I often say, you know, women are for Mars. What is it? Men are for Mars, women are for Venus. It's very true. I don't think men sometimes understand there's this nurturing element that comes with being a mother. You know, women are, there's something about how there's this continual, my wife tells me, this continual worry that you have for your children or those you're caring for, that you're always looking out for and you're always, you know, considering their needs and someone else's needs and always putting their needs above your own. Whereas, and I'm speaking very generally here, but I feel like with men, you know, we just go, yeah, they're all right. That's okay. Let them climb the tree, hang upside down. It's all good. They'll be all right. They'll fall on their head. They'll learn a lesson or whatever it might be. We're a little bit more flippant. We don't, you know, we're the workers often who go out and do stuff. And the women are the ones who are actually the nurturers. As I said, I'm speaking very generally. And I just want to acknowledge that and just say thank you to the mums who have also, as part of all this, have actually given up part of their life. You know, this, you know, being a parent, it's the same for men as well, but as a parent, it's a lifelong commitment. It's a lifelong thing. You never give up on your children. You never stop caring for them. You never stop looking out for them. You never stop worrying about them and how they might turn out and what decisions they might do. And I think I suppose my point is, I think that's even more significant for women. And so I just want to honour the women in this room for that, you know, for the way in which you've given up maybe parts of your life, you know, whatever that might be, to actually put in and invest into the future of your children. Children, acknowledge that. Don't take it for granted. Amen. Don't take it for granted.
Remember, if ever you miss one of our messages or services, you can always catch up by going to our website. There's a link there to our YouTube channel, and there you'll find all our recent messages, which will also include church news.
Upcoming services.